Welcome to the Front End Nerdery Podcast, a podcast about front end development and design. I'm your host, Todd Libby. My guest today is founder of SimpleBits, author, and aspiring sea captain, Dan Cederholm. Dan, how are you today?
Hey, Todd, I'm doing awesome. Thanks. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am Dan, and I currently living up in Salem, Massachusetts, and have lived in New England my whole life. So this is home. It's good to talk to a fellow New Englander, right? And yeah, so I'm a designer, a accidental entrepreneur, accidental author, accidental everything. Now that I think of it, nothing's been super well thought out on my end in terms of my professional life. And yeah, so designer and I co-founded a site called Dribbble, which is a community for designers back in 2009, and have since moved on from the company as of a couple of years ago. And I'm sort of the last few years anyway, I've kind of been reinventing my design self by taking on a bunch of different projects, just making things. I think I realized I just like to make stuff and not necessarily manage things, or I'm not good at managing things. So that's been a revelation. But so yeah, back to making stuff, designing, making fonts, books, shirts, hats, fun stuff. And just getting back to just designing for the sake of designing, maybe.
Yeah.
Just been fun. Just been a blast, actually.
Yeah, I have a thing with t-shirts, so you get a lot of orders from me for t-shirts.
I know. I was gonna say, you're like a super wonderful customer of SimpleBits, and I really appreciate that and all the support.
Well, with the first time I saw you had merch out, I was like, oh, I got to get that stuff because the book, the first book, the orange one.
Yep.
But it even went way back, so I'll get to that part in a minute. But yeah. The stuff you put out is great. I love it. I really wish that I know you had a shirt that you had to take down.
Yeah.
I wish I wish I got my hands on that one, but
oh well, I do have some left. I'll send you with the replaced book, because you got it. This is timely, but you got a book delivered today, completely damaged.
I did
in the mail, not by us. I promise you, but
right.
But that's wow. This got seriously mangled in the mail. I don't know what happened there. Wow, look at that.
Yeah, I think they ran it.
They must have ran it over with something,
Yeah, they ran it over and then backed up to make sure they ran it over and
right.
took off again.
That happens. But yeah, the shirt was interesting. That's a whole thing we could talk about if you want. Like, it's someone owned the trademark to the phrase "stay salty," which is something that you see it. A lot of people use it. There's tons of folks that have that saying on their products. If you do Google search, it's everywhere. Right. And I was unaware of this company that reached out and said, hey, we own the trademark to this. And I had to talk to my lawyer about it, and they're like, well, they do own the trademark, so they have a legit, case. If you wanted to litigate, it'll cost 6 figures or something. Like, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's not the name of the business or anything. So yeah. So anyway, we had to take that down, which is a shame, but we'll get you one.
All right, cool. Thanks. I appreciate it. So my first question, we'll get right into the questions now.
Yeah, let's do it.
I hinted back to the first book that you put out, which I'll get to in my second question. But how did you get started in your web development and design journey?
Yeah, well, going way back. It's funny. I think that I was always interested in design, even like early age. I think I didn't really know. I didn't know that was a thing, when I was younger. I didn't know that was a profession that you could do. And I loved logos, and I was really into skateboarding when I was younger, and I just loved I think I liked the design better than I did the actual skateboarding part. Yeah. And then, music, I was really into music for a long time and still am, but the design of the album covers and that like those parts always interested me in whatever I was interested in, the design aspect of something. And then it wasn't until like I discovered the web in the mid 90s really, where I saw an avenue to say, oh, this is something I can do. I can build websites that everyone can see that has internet connection. And the design of the site was something that really appealed to me. Like, it was this thing that it was very self-contained. All you needed was a computer in front of you. You didn't need equipment other than that, and you could create, and you could create something visually that someone would see. The distribution, like, it took the distribution out of it. You weren't mailing records or skateboards to people. You were just posting it online, and then people were seeing it. And I loved that about it. And so I think it was the web that like kind of brought those interests all together and made me realize, oh, this is what I've been interested in all along. And I didn't really know it until I had that tool, the computer, really, to do that. And yes, it was really the web that sparked that. And I had a really crappy job making minimum wage at a record label, and I worked my way up to this desk job that had like a Windows 3.1 machine, and that was my computer, because I didn't have one at home at the time, and we had internet. So I was like, that was my brief little taste of the web at that time, which was really interesting. And then I just ever since then, I was just all about the web and creating for the web and learning as much as I could know when I got home, about building a web page, because I wanted to build a web page for my band, and I wanted to learn how to. I just want to learn it all. View source, you could figure it out on your own. That DIY aspect of building websites back then was so fun and exciting, and felt like pioneering, those early days, because it was just like a free for all, and it just grew from there. And I kept learning on my own at night, and started documenting that in a blog, and which eventually became Simple Bits. I think we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of the domain name. So I had a few other ones before that, but like just blogging early on in those days, and I'm sure you remember, and like it's like it was the best time to learn things while also sharing that learning process at the same time. And that's something I've tried to embrace even today. The idea of sharing what you're learning as you're learning it. I think that was the spirit of the web, and maybe still is. Actually, that would be interesting to see what people that are starting now think of it. Hopefully they think of it the same way, that a lot of people share their knowledge, and it's easy to get free knowledge out there about building websites. And I hope that's still the case, and because that's what fueled me and fueled that community at that time, is just sharing. Like, we were figuring things out together, and everyone was kind of documenting that in their own way. Yeah, actually on blogs initially, because that's all that was.
Yeah.
That was a long-winded answer to your question. I just kind of went all over the place there.
Oh no, that was a great answer. I did the same thing. I started with a small little site, a little blog, turned it into a blog actually, and yeah, I remember those days of just this. I think there's more now these days with the advancement, of course, in technology, because people, they do learning on Twitch and on all these other platforms that you can write, like there was Medium, and then all these other sites came out as well.
Yeah,
that are kind of like Medium.
Yeah, the ability to publish has certainly been simplified, and which is great, right? It's no longer like, let's code a web page and FTP it to convey something. It's so much easier, which is awesome. Yeah, it's a good way. I feel like I'm curious, about the newcomers and how they view it, but I hope that there's still that sense of camaraderie among the design community that helps each other learn. And I think it is. I see it a little bit here and there, but
Yeah. So let's talk about books, because
yeah,
I have many of your books.
got a lot of books. Oh, nice. Oh, excellent. Hey, well, thanks, Todd.
You've written, and there was the ones that I alluded to a couple times. Web Standard Solutions was the first one, or was it Bulletproof Web? No, Bulletproof Web Design was after Web Standard Solutions.
Yes, yeah, that was the second book. Yeah, yep.
So I have those two. Web Standard Solutions. I had that. I actually bought that one in a local bookstore. It was a Walden Books.
Wow.
And
Bookstores.
it was one of my first, I think, maybe 4 or 5 web design books. I bought Jeffrey Zeldman's book, of course, Designing
Yeah,
Web
of course.
Standards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a few others. Then you had Handcrafted CSS, just to name a few. We've had a couple book apart titles.
Yeah. Yep.
And that was what, CSS3 and for web designers, and SAS for web designers.
Yes.
What was the process like writing those books? And I guess it was, correct me if I'm wrong, yeah, that was still when you were designing for the web. So why was the focus on CSS?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I really love CSS, or I should say loved, because I honestly I don't do a lot of it now, and I kind of miss it in a way, and in a way a lot, and I think I still love it. Actually, I think it's for whatever reason, I don't know, I just fell in love with markup and CSS, and the combination of those two things to visually create something I just loved. And I at the time, I think back in 2003 or whatever it was, when the first book emerged, that web standards movement was in full force, and everyone was, like I was saying earlier, everyone was sort of learning together about how to solve these problems that we were trying to solve, and there wasn't a ton of at the time there wasn't a ton of books. Obviously Jeffrey's book, the epic and pioneering and paved the way for what is, or the web standards movement. And through my blog, I think that's what tipped it. I blogged a lot about CSS and web design, what I was learning and figuring out, and everyone's figuring out these little solutions. You had a list apart, which was great, a huge resource, right? Every time someone came out with an article, you'd be like, this is how I'm going to tackle this problem now. And I remember blogging about how to, I had this thing on the site called Simple Quiz, really dumb name, but it was like posing the question on the blog, like, how would you mark up an address, and then there's multiple choice answers, because I think what I was doing is I was trying to get a consensus, but at the same time show that there are multiple ways to solve there's no one solution to designing something for the web. And that the idea of like, well, this could be a book, this should be a book, and people can collect all these things together, and this could be maybe a valuable teaching tool or whatever. And so I approached a couple publishers, and the one that really wanted to work with me was Friends of Ed, which was a press imprint, and had a really good editor there that was just really on board with the idea. And I was like, absolutely, this is great. And I didn't want to call it, it's funny, it's Web Standard Solutions is kind of a dumb name, but they really liked it, and that's kind of how it went. But at the time I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what the hell I was doing writing wise. And like, the thought of writing a book actually was really daunting and scary. And I had never, other than writing on the blog and whatever, it's not something I went to school for. It's not something I studied or even aspired to do, really. It's kind of bizarre the way it happened, but I'm glad it did. And I guess I fell in love with the idea of having to explain the same things that I was figuring out, as I was figuring them out. And I think that became useful for other people. And I realized that blogging, they have that immediate, like, put something up and you get immediate comments and feedback and whether you're doing it right or not. And that was great. And that was super helpful to say, okay, maybe this is something I can do and I could tackle. And then having a great editor was was key at that point. Is not being an author that really doesn't know what they're doing. The editor becomes super valuable and helpful if necessary. But so the process emerged from blogging really initially. And that got me started and kind of got a framework in place for me to be able to share how I would learn something and maybe try to explain that same technique and to others. And that led to and that's where the books kind of started going. The Bulletproof book was interesting because that one's, I was specifically trying to show, like, this is pre-responsive web design, right? So I was trying to show how CSS specifically could make things more flexible and in a way accessible. That wasn't like an obvious focus, but in a way, writing semantic markup at the time was kind of it wasn't something everyone was doing, and having to explain, like, well, you can do this 15 different ways, but these few ways here's why that could be beneficial for everybody. So that one was more focused, I think, on the way CSS could make things more flexible, extensible, and that, I think it was just right place, right time too, in terms of getting an actual book out there. There's plenty of people writing about it and doing it, and doing it better than I ever will, and even explaining it maybe better. But I just happened to be there, willing to actually print it or have it printed at that point. But
right.
Yeah.
So from that, I know I always thought, I wanted to write a book, but then I hear people talking about the process is difficult and everything. Sure. And well, it can be difficult. It's a long process. So I was like, I'll just keep on buying these books and reading them.
Well, it is the process. It is painful, actually. The multiple parts of it are painful. For me, I always thought the initial writing of it was the best part and the easiest part, and it was later, like the editing and preparing the figures and the actual logistical production of it was really laborious and kind of boring for me. But the actual writing, that's why having a great editor it's actually gold, because they can take the heavy lifting on. But it's daunting, and it's not always fun, for sure. But the reward is always great when you're done. And I don't run marathons or anything, but I can see how, like, people that do enjoy that, like, it's all about that finish line and the way you feel after it, that makes it worth it. But I'm also of the mind that, like, everybody can write books, and I really do believe that. And I think that, back when those books that we were just talking about were published, that was kind of like, there was like this whole industry of web design books, right? You go to the Walden, like you said, you go to Walden Books, there's like a section, and there's every imaginable topic you can imagine is there, and you can buy it, and that's the way people would learn. And now it's so different. But I think what is interesting is getting people's personal takes on these topics now that the topics are out there, and it's easier to find information on them. But, like, I would love to read a Todd book on anything, what I mean? Like, I just feel like the book, it seems so permanent, and when it's paper, it's printed on paper, it seems so, it elevates the content, I believe, to just naturally, by the way of, like, okay, well, there's a lot of work went into this. You have to print it. There's, like, physical things happening to make it work. And so the content could be, I'm just rambling here now, but the content that what I really love now is like that personal take on whatever it is, and as opposed to being completely academic. You know what I mean? Like if you wanted to write a book on lobster rolls, you know, for instance, which I know you love, like I I would love that book. And I don't think it would need to be the book on lobster rolls, like where you have to like research the lobster's history and all that crap.
Right.
It just be about here's where I go, here's why I like them, here's who makes them well, here's what goes into it, here's my take on, so like a book on lobster rolls rather than the book. And that's what I'm trying to do now actually with books is kind of remove that like barrier of I can't write this book on fonts. I didn't go to school for it. I don't know what I'm doing. There's so many more people that are more qualified than me to do this. So why should I write it? It's like if you take that barrier away and say, well, just write a book on making fonts that is your experience. And because there's room for there's room for more books. There's room for, you know, multiple books on lobster rolls and fonts, I think.
That's actually been, I've had people approach me at. I said, yeah, I was thinking of writing a book, and you should write one on lobster rolls. So,
oh, I'm not the first.
no, you're not the first.
Yeah, I love it. Todd, let's make this happen. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know, honestly, like I'm like that. It would be a really interesting book because that's something people are passionate about, right? And you're passionate about it. That's the other thing. When you're passionate about something, it's going to come through, you know, however you write about it. Yeah. You got to do it now. It's got to happen.
I got to do it.
Yeah.
I got to do it. The heat is on. So
yes.
I know you have a article on Medium, what I learned co-founding Dribbble.
Yeah. Yep.
So staying on the topic of books, was that part of, and I think that was you had that in the book, 20 Things I Learned About Design, Business, and Community.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Tell us about that book, because I enjoyed that book very much. And we'll go from there, actually.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that was, you know, I had retired from Dribbble and was just reflecting on what I was like, what the heck just happened over the last 10 years? And it looks like my video is frozen, huh?
I think it did freeze.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Let me try to restart it. See if there we go. There we go. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I was reflecting on, you know, what just happened there with Dribbble and founding it, and like what I learned as like someone who's not a business person per se, and not an entrepreneur at its core, but like as a designer that started a business that had some success and grew, and what did I learn from that? And so I thought I would just outline like 20 things, you know, 20 bits I learned about that, and put that on Medium, and then realize, hey, that this could be, why don't I write a little book? Going back to what I was saying earlier, is like, why not? I'm not an expert in all this, but it might be interesting to share, like, you know, what I learned, and really just self-publish it completely, and do all the doodles, even though I'm not really a doodler. And why not, you know, learn how to lay out a book and get it printed hardcover, and like the whole process of that is like equally as interesting to me.
Right.
How you make the book is interesting too, and as in addition to, you know, the stuff that I'm writing about. So that's what led to that, and that's been fun, because that format of, you know, it's not quite a memoir, but it sort of is, in that I was trying to encapsulate, you know, what I learned over those 10 years, and, you know, settling on a format that's like, it's going to be 20 little chapters, and each one's going to be a little short thing, and it doesn't matter how short or long each thing is. That really freed me up to be like, okay, this makes the process of writing this a lot easier. I can take each one and maybe do one a day or something, even, or every other day, or whenever I can, and focus on one of those, and they're connected in a way, but they don't have to necessarily be exactly connected, chronologically or anything. It's more just like sort of these 20 things that I learned and takeaways, and something that you could read on a plane ride and land and be like, okay, that's cool. I learned some stuff about what Dan thought about this. And that kind of format was really worked for the style of thinking I do. And I would love to see other people take that on too. It'd be neat. I mean, just here you go. This is how you can set up a book. It's like about
Right,
any
right.
topic, and it was received well. And that, led me to do another one that's just come out about making fonts. And that's another new, even a topic that I really not qualified to write about, but yeah, I did anyway,
Mhm.
because what the hell. And I took that same format and broke it down, like, here's 20 things I learned about making fonts, and hopefully it's as well received as the first one, but it's to be seen. But I just love the whole process. I think when you enjoy the process of something, it matters less about how successful that end thing is, right?
Mm.
It's that's icing on the cake if it's actually successful, if it's profitable, or if it's well received or whatever. That's icing on the cake when you've enjoyed that process from start to finish. And so, like, writing books, going back to your question earlier about, it seems like a laborious process. It seems hard, and it is. And I think these two books that I've done self-publishing
Mhm.
have been my way of saying, all right, how do I break it down so that I enjoy, like, all of the process the whole way through, and sort of optimize my time on being passionate about the whole thing.
Right.
And that's the result, I guess, is these little arguably artistic books.
I think your video froze again.
Video froze again. Jeez, what's going on? Sorry. There we go. I'm back.
No worries. This is a low budget production anyway, so
That's the way to do it.
yeah. I
Really?
decided, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do a podcast and I'm just gonna press record and let it do its thing,
Yeah, let it do its thing.
let nature take its course. So the book, I enjoyed that book, 20 things I learned about design, business, and community. And I remember we were both on the quarantine book club Mike and Erica had.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Yep.
And I enjoyed, and I enjoyed the book a lot. And the one thing, and I think we might have touched upon this in that book club meeting at the time, was you had a chapter in the book that said choose the right partner or something similar to that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
I had almost chosen the wrong partner, and that resonated with me.
Yeah, sure.
For some reason, it just, I was thinking, boy, I dodged a bullet there. And you're right. You have to find the right partner, the right fit to do, to go into business with. So that was a great book. And I'll put everything in the show notes, the links to the books and everything.
Oh, awesome. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, that's great to hear, Todd. I think, yeah, that choosing the right partner, it's one of those things that, I obviously wasn't thinking of at the time. And I don't think Rich was either. Rich, the co-founder of Dribbble. And I think we got fortunate in that we were good friends first. But at the same time, there's challenges there. Even when you're good friends, running a business together, it's not like you're not just hanging around being friends. There's a lot that goes into it. And there's, making sure that things are delegated equally and everyone's pulling their weight. And I learned a ton from obviously from the whole experience. And I certainly learned that I'm awful at managing, and well, that's not all I'm awful at, but I I think that it is, like I say in the book, it is like a marriage, co-founding something with someone, and whether you have multiple founders or whatever, maybe it's a marriage that involves multiple people, but it is like that. And you're going to run into a lot of weird things. Like if you're successful, right, which you hopefully are with your business, the thing that you're starting, whatever, you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people and making a lot of decisions with these people. And some of the decisions are big and they're sort of affect lives and employees and everything. And, having that foundation of being on the same page with the person you're starting this thing with is super important. And not everyone's fortunate enough to to make that decision thoughtfully. It's tough. Things start in various ways. Dribbble started as a side project, and we didn't start with a business plan where we sat down and said, this is the business, and this is what you're going to be in charge of, and this is what I'm going to be in charge of, and this is how we're going to run it. And it just sort of evolved over time. And so when I say choose your partner wisely, it's almost like a warning for folks that do have the opportunity to say, I'm looking for a co-founder right now before we even get started. And here's some things to think about when you're choosing that person or looking for that person, and recognizing that that's not always how businesses start. And sometimes those work out great and sometimes they don't. But if you're able to have that time to choose and thoughtfully think about your strengths versus the other person's strengths and how those mesh and all that, that's the ideal, that's the ideal time to do that. Yeah.
So I gotta ask, because I see it on your bios, and when I was doing my research, I saw it a lot. Tell the listeners about accidental entrepreneur and cautious adventurer.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, so accidental entrepreneur is definitely it's a way of saying, like, look, I may have started a few businesses, but I didn't. It's almost like my way of saying I don't really know what I'm doing, and it's like a disclaimer, like I don't know. I didn't go to business school, and I really I don't know what I'm doing. So take anything that I prescribe as actually non-prescriptive, and since sort of like here's what worked for me, but it may not work for you. And it's true. It's totally true in that I've stumbled into all these things. I think I was at, what was it, Fast Company magazine back in early 2000s, and that's when the web standards thing was going, and we redesigned the site with CSS, and that gained me some notoriety in the web standard space at the time. And then I got laid off from them because they moved to New York and they changed, and then I didn't know what to do, and that forced me into freelancing, and I didn't set out to do that. I didn't want to do it. It was scary as hell. Didn't want to do that, but I ended up, getting lucky with getting a few clients lined up initially, and then and suddenly a few months went by, and I said, "Oh, I guess I'm a freelancer now because I've been paying the bills, and I haven't really. It's been working." So that was accidental. Dribbble was accidental, in terms of being a side project and just growing that, and that was a journey. And there was another site I did with Dan Benjamin called Cork, which was like a social network for wine people.
I remember that one. Yeah.
You remember that? Yeah.
I do remember that one.
Yeah, it was fun. And that was accidental as well, because it was just like, oh, why can't I share? I want to follow what you're drinking if you like wine. And not that I'm a wine expert or anything, but like, it was just something that I wanted to see for myself. And then that turned into something. And then we later sold that to Gary V, of all people, who's done quite well for himself after that. But so that's accidental. And so I think that part of my bio is just like a disclaimer in that you can create businesses like unintentionally that that still work out, and I'm still learning, every day. I don't pretend to know what I'm doing, but I kind of like it that way. I think that the older I get, I learn like that's okay that I don't know, and it's less scary and more like I'm just going to embrace that and maybe willing to take some more risks than I was when I was younger. The cautious adventure part is more of like a non-design interest thing where I love the outdoors and I love, being on the water however I can and exploring. And at the same time, I have anxiety and deal with that. And so I'm super cautious. I'm not one of those people that's like rock climbing and jump out of an airplane, but I love anything to do with that, watching it on the sideline. So I'm sort of a poser outdoor person or something, and that's kind of why I would write cautious adventure, because I love adventuring, but I'm definitely nervous about a lot of things. And so that's little teeny insight into my non-design space, I guess.
Yeah, I get that. I the cautious adventurer part is something that really, I'm one of those people too that are like, yeah, I can watch people jump out of a plane or, jump off a bridge with a cord strapped to their foot, but
Yes,
that's it. That's the
right.
extent of it.
Well, it's cool, right? Yes, and I love that. I'm like a fan of that stuff. Like I love the idea of I did some snowboarding, and then I like landed on my knee, and I was like, I'm like, I stay away from. I would not go on black diamond trails or even blue trails for that matter. Be like, I stick to green, but I love it. I love the green trail. Right? It's not like this sucks, I can only do green trails. It's like, no, I love the cautious adventure part of this. Like I'm going to stick to the easy where I'm in control. And so like you, like I love the idea of jumping out of a plane or anything like adventure like that. I'm totally, like climbing Mount Everest or whatever. It's like, that is so cool. And I'll watch documentaries every night about things like that. But when it comes down to doing it, like I'm definitely, it's another disclaimer. Like, hey, I might talk about this stuff and post photos from crazy places or whatever, but I am not one of those people that's airing or anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just being honest.
Looking at it from afar works for me in some things.
Same.
So going back, to the business part, what's the best thing you've learned about starting a business?
The best part, well, I think there's a couple things that I love about it, and I think one of them is the independence is huge. I think I'm certainly unemployable at this point because I've been doing this long enough on my own where I can't imagine. I think like work-life balance is huge. I mean, there are, don't get me wrong, there's many stresses about running a business that anybody knows they would agree. Like it's not all, it's certainly risky and there's unknowns and stuff that come up, but that independence part of it is crucial. And like being able to be there for kids' doctor's appointments without having to worry about literally not telling anybody and just being able to sort of roll with the punches of life is huge. I think that's probably the top one for me. I think the other one for me has been exploring different interests and having the flexibility to do that. I guess that goes along with independence too, but just I think the way business for me has evolved, like started freelancing, building websites, and that has evolved into just sort of a general design, like creating anything, logos and fonts and writing and the ability to explore those different things. And some of them don't work out, some of them do, but just being fortunate enough to be able to experiment with them and find the things that I do like to do has been invaluable. And that's not really a good business plan, like experimenting with things to see if they work. But for me, I kind of lump it in with that, because being my own boss, I'm able to do those experiments and see what works. So I think, yeah, in general, the sort of independence of it has definitely made it all worth it. I think with Dribbble, it was eventually it became, and I touch on this in the book too, about those relationships that you make with people on teams. And I do miss that, being on my own again. But the fact that you're employing people was really satisfying, that you're building a culture in a place for people to be creative. And that was really satisfying and amazing. And I do miss that, so maybe we'll get back to that at some point, building a team. But I talk about those relationships, after everything is gone, all the pixels are gone, because when you talk about building for the web, like, there's very little. I remember looking back at my portfolio, like everything I had created digitally is just not even there anymore. Like all these projects I did, and that they seemed so important at the time. They seemed like life or death matters for the clients, and now they're just not even there anymore because they've replaced. And that's just the nature of creating on the web, which is also its strength too, right? And sort of the appeal of it. But when you toss all that aside, it's like, what's left is those relationships with the people that you have worked with, and that's kind of what I realized. What mattered the most was like the people. So I would say that would be another one of running a business, is that those relationships and the people that you get to meet and work with. And
it got to a point with me very recently where I look back at what I did back in the day, and now everything's on the, what is it, archive.org. It's on the internet Wayback Machine.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
exactly.
And lucky to be where I am now at the company that I'm with now because of the transition I made. So it's, that part really, I really got that part. So if you had any words of advice for anybody that, and I know a few people that I've talked to recently have become accidental entrepreneurs, what would that be?
Yeah.
First, I would say buy the book, read that book.
Glad you said that. Yes, absolutely. That's step one. Buy the book that I made. Yeah, I think. I was gonna say, for me, more so at the beginning of my career, I guess, but writing was like the biggest boost for everything, whether that be a blog or, these days there's a host of ways you can publish things, but writing your thoughts and sharing those as you're learning, and not be afraid to be a voice about a topic. I kind of wish I knew that earlier in life. I feel like I'd be doing different things maybe. So writing, I think it sounds goofy, but I think writing down things is important. And so a lot of people are probably like, yeah, that's obvious. That's what I do all the time, whatever. But I think not only just writing, but the sharing of that is important, right? So for visibility for you and your business or your project or whatever it is you're doing, the more you can share about not only the product but the process, I think was valuable to me anyway. So I would, that's something I would recommend. A little vague, but writing and sharing. The other thing I would say is, what would I say? It's a tough one. Why is it so tough? Like, I think you've got to be passionate. So here's one thing. You've got to be passionate about what it is you're doing. I think that the best business, not every business, but the best businesses to me are born from something where the people or person is supremely passionate about that thing. And it's not just wake up in the morning and say, okay, I got to start a business. So what's going to make me the most money? And that does happen. And businesses are born that way. And some of them may be successful, but I think the best brands and businesses that have a lasting impact, I think, are born from being very passionate about it. And so that it shows that it was created because the people that created it wanted it to be there, and not necessarily with revenue and primarily in mind. So be passionate, write, share, choose a good founder that you love, or, that you can stay partnered with for indefinitely. Be nice, be kind, because you never know. That's another thing. I mean, you never know who you're going to run into again later on in your career. And that's certainly been true for me. I think that the connections I've made with people, whether it be clients or colleagues or whatever over the years, those have always been, the kinder you are and the just more stand-up person you can be is going to, it's karma. It goes back to like karma, it comes back to you later on, I think. So that's important as well. Just be nice.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
This turned into like a Tony Robbins style thing. Hopefully not, but
I 100. Well, I should say just 100% agree, because if I say 110%, I have people coming at me. You can't do that. But anyways,
right.
So, swinging the conversation now to the book, 20 Bits I learned about making fonts. And you've seen some of the photos I've taken, and I use actually Vault Alarm on the YouTube cover.
Yeah, which I love. Yes, excellent.
Also a big fan of the fonts. I love the font. I actually have all of them. So
thanks.
I urge people, if you're into fonts, go out and buy them. I'm not a big, I over the years, my design has kind of changed. It's gone to, what really first got me into design was labels.
Yeah.
Whether it was from bottles or from cans or from old ads,
packaging and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that shifted to signage, and then and fonts as well. Again, I had another idea of making a font, and the people that know me best, well, the lobster font has already been taken. What are you going to do?
Right. It's called Lobster. Yeah, sure. And that's a pretty popular font too, actually.
It is. But focusing on the book, what has been, the best part about making fonts? Because, you have 5, I believe, out now.
Yeah, there's 5 out right now. Yep, that's right. Yeah, no, it's been such a fun journey. I was like, I've always been interested in fonts too, and like you, packaging and just anytime you see fonts are everywhere. Once you realize that, it's kind of maddening, right? We start noticing everyone's like,
yes, it is.
Yeah, it is. People that like fonts, but yeah. So I always loved fonts, and back in, this is years and years ago, but I made a pixel font, which was my first attempt at creating a font. And at the time, that program that I was using was, I don't even remember. I think it was Font Lab, I'm pretty sure. And they've probably moved a lot since then, but it was just really difficult to use. And people go to school full time to learn how to make fonts. So it definitely can be a very academic practice that requires a lot of skill and education and everything. At the same time, I think there is room, and this is why I wanted to create this book, is for designers that already are creating things and making letters. And I actually, I mentioned in the book that everyone actually does draw letters, right? We write and we handwrite less and less so now, but the idea of making fonts is it can be accessible to any designer, I think. And if I can do it, then anyone can. And so again, it was like one of those things that as I was learning and discovered Glyphs app specifically was kind of an eye opener for me, because that was it made it a lot easier. The software made a lot more sense to me, and it's just a really well made piece of software that makes it easier to make fonts than previous ones. So once I started doing that, I'm like, this is great. And why don't I document this process? Because there's probably a lot of folks out there like me that want to make a font or are able to, but maybe just intimidated by the type community, and which can be intimidating, or the software, and how do I get started? And I think that there's a lot of room for quirky fonts that aren't necessarily meant to be replacements for something like Helvetica or Times New Roman, or something that you would use to in a book or a document or something. There's a lot of room for fonts that are used for signage and packaging, like you were saying, and logos and things, and things with a lot of personality from that specific designer. That was really what got me motivated to do that. So it's just been a blast to realize, like, oh, it's not that difficult. This is possible. I can make fonts that I want to see, based on inspiration from signs or whatever I see. It's fun to see that and have that itch to scratch, and actually be able to do it and follow through with it and release it and have it be used. People can use it. That's so satisfying to me, and it's been a real turning point for me in terms of design and what I want to create, and sort of how I want to pivot. Pivot's not the right word, but focus the business forward, sort of type centric and design centric, and creating different products and different things off of that. So it's been a blast. I mean, and I've been learning a ton, and I still have an infinite amount to learn about it, because there really is an infinite amount to learn.
So what's the hardest part about font making for you?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Kerning is tough. It's tedious, and there are ways to make it easier, and I think it's the most daunting part of it, and the most tedious, and it's kind of a pain in the ass, but it's super important. And you're creating these things for designers to use, so obviously there's that little pressure too. You've got to get this kerning right, or else people love to call out bad kerning, and that's like a pastime of designers. Whether you make fonts or not, you're going to call it out. So the kerning is tough, and I'm learning more and more about that, but also like a realization that some of this stuff is subjective, right? And there are rules, and you can go to school for creating type, but there are parts of it that are subjective, and sometimes I second guess myself on, is this curve the perfect curve for this letter? And you kind of can go back and forth in like nonstop about that, and then realize, wait, it's fine. It's we're gonna, like, I think it's fine right now, so I'm going to move on and come back to it. So kerning, to answer your question, kerning is definitely one of the hardest parts. And I think that grows exponentially. The larger your font set is, that just grows exponentially. The kerning pairs across weights and styles, and lowercase, uppercase. That's why I say in the book too, like, start with uppercase, start with a display font that's in uppercase, because that reduces the amount of kerning and spacing and all that you have to do. So that's an easy way to get started. And I'd say that's probably the hardest. The other hardest part, I think, is some of the letters are tough, right? I think getting those curves correct on some letters is just you can drive yourself crazy just dragging Bezier curve handles, all day. And it's like like I just spent an hour on this S, or not even the S, but like the part of the S, and right. It doesn't look now it looks worse than it did an hour ago. And you can that's just, I think that's part. I want to ask actual, type designers, but I feel like that's probably the curse of a lot of folks, just second guessing every move of every minute move of one of the handles,
Right.
and so some of the letters are easier than others, some are tough. Yeah, S obviously is a tough one, but once you have once you nail it, I just love the fact that building a font is like building these components, really, right, that start to get reused in letters. And once you get started, the momentum sort of exponentially grows, so you get through faster. Oh, okay, this is a 3. Well, I've already done these curves on this B. Maybe this is, we can reuse those, and maybe that's the right. So I'm always looking for ways to reuse parts of the letters, and that helps to make it whole cohesive as well. But
Yeah. So let's go into the book. I just got mine this morning, so I haven't been able to open it.
yeah,
Literally not able to open it.
yeah, I know. Got mail. Oof.
What can you tell us about the book?
I can tell you that it was really fun. It was really fun to write, and because it's something new. Like I basically spent the quarantine really is the reason this book is out, because I spent a lot of it initially like learning how to make fonts from scratch, really from the beginning. And there was this sign that I would walk by all the time, and I talk about this in the book, but the vault alarm actually that you use for this podcast. And I would walk by, for 20 years or something, I'd walk by this sign. That's such a cool font. It's like this vintage type. I don't know what font it is. And I'd walk by it and I'd be like, I wish there was a font, an entire font made from, this style. And maybe I should do that someday. And then finally, the quarantine, like everybody, we're sitting around trying to think of what things to do. And that was one. I was like, I'm finally going to do this. And I'd interviewed the Hood sisters, Amy and Jen Hood Spa Design, on the Simple Bits podcast, and they had mentioned they were making fonts, and they mentioned Glyphs, this app, and you got to check out Glyphs. It's really easy to use, and so that was okay, I'll check that out, and I downloaded it, and that kind of snowballed, and then so made that font, and then made a couple more, and just sort of it just grew and grew. And then I realized, okay, I think this would be fun to document this the way I did document the Dribble experience in this book, with the same format, 20 bits I learned. Each bit is like a little teeny chapter, and we can illustrate it the same way. We can basically share, like, here's a book about making fonts from someone that had no idea what he was doing a year ago, and that's the kind of book that that's the thing that I would have liked when I first started, right? And there's an infinite amount of books about typography and making fonts, and you're talking about a severe investment of time to get through some of that stuff. And I just wanted to get to the end goal, which was make this sign I saw into a font that I can download and use, and that was the goal initially. And so I thought this would be helpful for folks that were in the same boat, and they're like, I know design, I know how to draw letters, I do it all day, but making that into a font, that's crazy. That's for people with like master's degrees or something, and and that's not the case, right? So I'd use that same format as the first book, breaking it down into those 20 bits, which makes it easier for me to write, and then self-contained. Like, it's only going to be 100 pages. It's going to be this dimension. That's going to be 2 colors, offset printed. There's all these constraints that I set on this, which really help a lot to just focus the project, right? Because you could say, I want to write a book on fonts, and that could go in a million different directions. It could be 1,000 pages. It could be full color, illustrated by somebody. It could, there's a whole bunch of things. But I set these constraints on so that it doesn't seem so crazy an idea to me, and I can actually get through it and do it
Mhm.
and get it printed, in a reasonable amount of time so that it's still relevant
Yeah.
to where I'm at with the process. But yeah, that's what I did. And hopefully it's useful for folks that are interested in this, and hopefully it's just, one of many tools that they'll need and again, that goes back to the idea that I love of books being more casual, less academic, and it doesn't have to be this definitive book on the topic. It's just something that's a little more fun and helpful if you're interested in this stuff.
Yeah.
I'd love to do more of these too. I don't know about different topics. I don't know what they'd be.
I think maybe there's a idea running through my head right now of a collab with doing one of these in lobster rolls.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah. Like 20 bits I learned about lobster rolls. Like, there you go. I mean, imagine that. That would be a fun book, and it'd be fun visually and actually interesting, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of things that I could think that I would want to know from you about this, and it makes it palatable. Yeah, I actually had that thought about, like, well, could this be like a publishing platform for people in a way that where it creates this framework that's a little like less intimidating, and it's like, oh, I could write a book on lobster rolls, or I could write a book on making leather wallets, because that's what I do, or whatever it is. That has crossed my mind. Like, I don't know if, I guess we'll have to see how these books do first. But again, I would love a Todd Libby book on lobster rolls, honestly. And I don't even like to eat lobster. That's how much I think it's a good idea. I don't eat lobster, but I still would read that. I would love that book though, because yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
I'll stop.
Oh, we'll have to talk more about that.
Yeah, there you
What's
go.
that?
Well, I see the wheels turning though. This is good.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to follow up on this, definitely. I'm all for it. So I want to mention real quickly, because I'm looking at them right here.
Yeah.
You have the Captain Edward font, you have the Rotundo font, you had the ship's whistle, and the one that I really liked that I thought about using before I went with Vault Alarm was the Parkley font.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a really nice font. That was,
thank you.
That one really caught my eye. But yeah, they're really great. And again, I'll put everything in the show notes for those links and stuff to those items. So you mentioned the Simple Bits podcast, and it's been a while. Are you going to be picking that up again?
Yes. I'm glad you asked. Yes, I definitely want to reboot that again. And for some reason during the pandemic, I don't know. There's something about podcasting that just seemed weird for me. And there's no reason for it. It's actually a perfectly fine thing to do, because you can do this remotely, and I don't know why. I don't know what I was thinking, but for whatever reason, I do want to bring it back now, actually, and start anew. And we've got some plans actually to do that. One of the things I'd love to do is like a game show, maybe format, with sort of like Wait, Don't Tell Me, but for design. So you can do like have a couple guests on and have some fun there, but and also get back to interviewing folks and all that. But yeah, so hopefully soon.
I really like the what you had there with and the puppet. So
puppet,
the puppet
may or may not
it was
people might be sick of the puppet. I can never tell. I love it, but who knows.
Oh, I love it. I think you should stick with it.
Okay, good.
If anybody's not sure, I would go and subscribe to the podcast. And I think you had a video out, didn't you?
Yeah, I've made some little videos here and there, with the puppet. I mean, it would be the reason my ideal, if I had to set, if I could set it up where I'm actually the puppet the entire time. We do like a video podcast and I'd be the puppet the entire time. That would be amazing. But I'll tell you one thing I have learned, and this could be another book, maybe 20 bits I learned about puppeteering, but like it's extremely physically demanding to properly puppet. And a lot of it comes down to the position you have to be in to be out of the frame, but it also have the puppet in the proper frame. And then you have to have like a monitor system so you can actually see what you're doing. So I've done ones where I'm really uncomfortably contorted on the floor, like trying to so I can only do it for like a minute or something. And I would do like a few like teaser videos, but in a perfect world, both guests would be puppets, and that would be incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
how do you like it? I'm glad you inspired me to keep it going.
Well, the content, I love the content. You're talking about design, which still, I mean, I'm not much into design anymore as I used to be, but it's still, like you were talking about with CSS, you still have that love for it. And I still have that love for design. So, yeah. So we're getting close to time here. So I have 3 questions I ask all my guests, and why don't we get to those questions right now?
Great.
First one is, what about the web these days excites you and keeps you excited in what you do?
Wow. Yeah. It's a good question.
Or it could be design as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, with the web, I think I want to say it's probably the same thing that it got me excited about it in the first place. I think it's the ability to share immediately, with whoever, wherever. I still think that's like, I still think that's amazing. And maybe it's like being from that generation that we're an interesting generation because we remember what life was like before the web. And then we grew, and now we know what it's like with the web. And whereas like I think about my kids, like they've just grown up and it's just been there the whole time. And so maybe it's second nature, right? Maybe it's taken for granted, or hopefully not. But I think I'm old enough where I still appreciate the fact that, my God, we're communicating this way and it's immediate. And I love the idea that it democratizes like creativity, and that people can be creative, and literally anybody can, have their creation seen and appreciated. I think that's something like growing up, it seems like this other world that I would just be observing, like whether it be musicians or publishing, but even book publishing. When I first got started, like that was, the barrier to entry was so much greater than it is now. So I think that's what really gets me excited, is that people are getting discovered every day, just on, even on social media or whatever. Just it's so much easier to be seen, to have your voice heard, I guess. That's the way of looking at it. Yeah.
So if there was one thing that you could change about the web that we know today, what would that be?
Ooh. Good question, Todd. I do wish that, I'm going to sound like an old guy here. I do, which is accurate, but I do wish that it was easier to build websites. I'll say it. I was thinking about this the other day. Like one of the things that got me excited too early on was that you didn't really need to be specialized at all when you're creating something. And it certainly was like far more duct tape than it is now. I think it still is kind of duct taped, actually. Maybe that's just the nature of what the web is. But when I first started, there was like, webmaster was like a thing, and it was like the one person, right, on a team that would be responsible for all of everything. And that was kind of fun, and you had more control, and you at least understood. Granted, designing for the web was a big pain in the ass back then, of course, but we're capable of so much more now, obviously. But for people starting out, like, it must be intimidating. Like, you can't just be like, I just want to make websites. It's like, you are you a front end developer? Are you back end? Are are you JavaScript? Are you, there's a lot more that goes into creating websites and specialization, which is needed for everything that we're doing. But I just wish it was easier to create independently things on the web, I guess. And again, that probably sounds like an old curmudgeon. The old days are better, which they weren't really. I mean, obviously, like, what we had to deal with was just absurd with the browser issues and that kind of thing. And then some. So to counterpoint what I just said, it is easier to create for the web now, but I think that the industry in general is certainly different. The professional side of making websites is far more specialized, but I just wish it was easier. I just feel like I just wish the technology was simpler. That I don't know where I'm going with that, but I'll leave it at that. Just wish it was easier.
Yeah. No, that was we had back in the day, we had FTP, and now you can push whatever to GitHub, and that goes on your Netlify account, and boom, it's on the web.
Exactly. Like there was fewer avenues to get something published, I think, back then. So it was easier to know what you were up against. And I feel like now, if someone just starting out now, like, you start mentioning, what's GitHub and what's I don't know. I'm trying to think of, like, what's NPM and what do I have to do this command line stuff. Like, there's just so many. It's overwhelming, or to me, it looks like it would be overwhelming. But for someone coming in, I just wonder. I always have wondered for a while. I wondered, like, if will there be a level of abstraction soon that and you sort of see that with some of the, like, I'm thinking of like Webflow and some other tools where they are abstracting all the front end goodies behind something that's a lot easier to handle. But I wonder if there's a non-capitalist way of looking at that, where is there a web standard that could emerge that is a level above what this current stuff is, and for folks that just want to simply create something. And I don't know where I'm going with that, Todd, but I just wish it was easier for folks. That's all.
There's such a wide variety of choices, and
yes,
I look at I do it a certain way now with my site that I like. I use Eleventy. I put my everything in on GitHub, and that pushes out to Netlify. That works for me. I'm fine with that. And just all the tools that I see coming out, it's this one's faster, but this one's
that's overwhelming. Yeah. The tools, exactly. It's overwhelming to keep up with, what I should be using to do the job that I do, right? And that as a somewhat outsider to this now, which is weird, I feel like that would be intimidating. I just wouldn't want someone turned off from web development that might be really talented and qualified to do it, just because things are moving so fast that it's a turn off. At the same time, you can't knock the speed at which things are changing, and that's good too. So I get it, but it just hopefully should be easier.
Yeah. So last question.
Yeah.
Is your favorite part of the front end development, or your favorite part of design that you really like the most, or the thing that you nerd out over?
Ooh, yeah, I like this one. Okay, right. Which is appropriate for the title of this podcast, right?
Yes.
Nerdery. I mean, geez, I nerd out about so much. I'm trying to think of what would I choose. I think I you know, and I don't do this a ton these days, but I really miss like that fresh. You open up a new, you know, a new text editor tab, and you're literally building that thing from scratch. I just loved that first few hours of building a new web page. I'm thinking of like a standalone like page, not like template or component or something, but just like literally like I've got to create this one page. That just to me was like it's so exhilarating. Like it was way back then when I was first learning, and it still is to me today. The fact that you can take like just HTML and CSS and build something like that I don't know, it's just so fun. And you still can. That's the thing, is like you don't need all the things that we use today, the tools and that kind of thing. And I would love to get back to just creating HTML and CSS pages. That would be my ideal job now, actually. Yeah. It's just like someone like, you know what I mean? Like they just send you a very, you know, simple static mock, and I would just turn that into a web page. That would be like an amazing job to me, where I didn't need to use any, like there'd be no command line required, no JavaScript required. I'm literally just marking up the page and styling it with CSS to look like that would be my ideal job. Is anyone hiring? Does anyone do that anymore? Like that's the thing.
I don't know. I don't know.
Without a framework, no nothing. Just like, and I literally, I wouldn't need a book to open up beside me. I wouldn't need anything. It would just be like, I'm just coding it from memory, and I miss that immensely, actually. Because that's the part, that's the creative part of web development that I miss, you know. I really do.
Yeah. That takes me back to the days of GeoCities and AngelFire and all those sites.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wish it was that easy. You code what you're going to code and click that publish button, and you were done.
You're done.
Yeah.
And there it is. And there's the information for people, you know?
Yeah. So I'd like to close out the podcast with my guests letting the listeners know what they currently have going on and where people can find you. So the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Todd. Yeah. So I, currently my big push this month is the new book. So that's 20 bits I learned about making fonts. It just self-published. We just arrived. The books just arrived. We're shipping them now. So that's been a focus there. And the other focus is, continue to make fonts. So we've got some things in the works there. Getting the podcast going again. I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, that was something I was going to mention. And growing, just growing Simple Bits as a business again, which has been really fun to kind of double back and focus on that. And yeah, so folks can find me. Simplebits.com is the main site in the shop where you can get the fonts and t-shirts and all that stuff. And Simple Bits on Twitter and Simple Bits on Instagram, if your algorithm even wants to show me in there, but go directly to my profile and you'll see it. But yeah, and that's where you can find me. And I'd love if you did, reach out. I'd love to hear from folks. If you pick up the book or a font or anything, just, give me a shout, give Todd a shout, get him motivated on this book and the law rules. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on today. I had a great time talking and chatting with you. It was great.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Todd. It's a pleasure, and I love what you're doing with it and all your work. And I wish you the best of luck with moving to West Coast. And yeah, it's going to be different, but yeah,
it's just a new chapter in that autobiography that will be coming about 20 years from now.
There you go. Love it. Chapter indeed. It's awesome. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate your time today. And I want to thank the listeners for tuning into the Front End Nerdery podcast. I'll be back next month with a new guest, new conversation about front end design, development, and whatever else comes up. If you would please rate this podcast on your podcast device of choice, like, subscribe, and watch on the Front End Nerdery YouTube channel as well, where I use the Vault Alarm font provided by Dan himself. Links to transcripts and show notes will be there. I'm Todd Libby, and this has been the Front End Nerdery podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.